Christian says something, I'm not wanting to believe it until I see the proof. And that's what we ought to be, right? We need to see proof. You know, if somebody comes and tells you that I've done something, I hope you wait for the proof before you crucify me. Show me the proof. Didn't we both act the same toward you, is his question. And that was obvious. The answer is obvious. And so they had followed these teachers, or allowed these teachers to confuse and trick them into believing falsely about Paul, and not only Paul, but those whom Paul sent. Because none of them had received money from Corinth. But the accusations were made. Paul's only here to get your money. Paul's only here to make a living. But Paul then talks about, in the last 3 verses, he talks about his expected visit. Do you think he asks that we are trying to excuse ourselves for not coming to you in person? Well, Paul wasn't trying to excuse himself, and he is going to come. If you think I'm trying to excuse myself by my defense, that's not what I'm doing, Paul is saying. I'm coming. And he needed to. Basically, Paul is calling upon God as a witness. As a witness to the fact that he speaks only in the name or by the authority of Christ concerning salvation and all things pertaining to the church. He basically says this: we do all things, dearly beloved, for your edification or your edifying. Anything that I say, anything I do, is to build you up. So I think it's a marvelous statement that he makes. And Paul still has fears about what he's going to find when he comes, and he mentions those. Number one thing he says, I fear that I shall not find you as I would. I will find you like I want to find you. He's afraid that he's going to find them in such a spiritual disparity that he's going to be disappointed in them, that he's going to find them not penitent for the things that they've done that was wrong, and so he's wanting to see. But also that they would not like what they saw in him. If he came and he's stern, they're not going to like it, and that's one of the fears that Paul had. You know, he didn't want to be or desire to be stern, but he would do so if it was necessary, if he needed to be. Even though they might be disappointed in him for doing that. And sometimes we allow ourselves in that fear, even today in the church, to keep us from doing things we should. And so he says, lest there be all kinds of dissensions among you. And then he lists those things. He debates. The word here in the Greek refers to quarrels and strife and discord among the teachers of the congregation. He's afraid that he'll not only find that, but envyings. That's jealousy among the leaders, and perhaps having different factions and different parties in the congregation, them fighting one another, wrath, anger. Perhaps someone has harmed you and you're harboring that anger, even if someone's penitent of that. Strife. Strife is usually related to the words we use. I may not ever throw a punch, but maybe I use ill or mean words, and he's afraid he might see that, or backbitings. That's just downright evil talking about someone else, which is exactly what they were doing to Paul. And so they have been proven to be able to do that. He's afraid he'll see it among the congregation. Whisperings. The word whisperings in Greek refers to slander, saying untruthful, unfounded things to defame another person's integrity. Same as what they were doing to Paul. Swellings, men making themselves look big, self-conceit. Talked about them having being disorderly. So Paul had these fears that these were the things that he was going to find. He talks about the fact that he laments or he has mourning over them, not the exact word, but great grief. And Paul is hurt, truly hurt, when a soul is lost. Just about every time I hear about a Christian dying, my first thought is, I hope they've been faithful. I hope they've been faithful. Because it's such a great loss for any soul to be lost, but especially for an unfaithful Christian. He talked about their incestuous things that had gone on in the congregation, the evil things that were going on. And first thing that comes to my mind is that relationship that man was having with his father's wife. He's hoping that all of those things have been taken care of. And to be honest with you, some of the stuff that Paul has mentioned in 1 Corinthians up to this point, and there's been so many issues, we hopefully don't see or have that in our congregations. No doubt, sometimes it has, but I hope we don't see it here. I got a question. How would you like to be Paul and you be responsible for that congregation?
It must have been pretty bad to have that.
It's pretty bad. How would you like to be
That's
the one
rough,
sitting
isn't
down,
it?
writing this letter, and knowing that sometime in the near future, you're having to make that trip to correct these things in that congregation? That would be a dreadful task ahead of you, and to do that. 2 letters have been sent to help them get things squared away or straightened out. Now Paul says, I'm coming in person. I'm going to have to come in person to finish the job. But always remember, if Paul hadn't loved them so much, he would have just said, sorry, no, bye, I'm through. But he had such a great love for them. He did care. He was concerned. He wanted their salvation secured. And so I think that should be, definitely has to be our attitude today. Any questions up to this point? All right, that pretty much concludes chapter 12. Let me go to the book and see if we can answer these questions. Still have your book. Question number 1. This chapter speaks of Paul's blank and blank of the Lord. What was it? How did Paul start out? You remember? Didn't he talk about the visions and the revelations that God had given him? There in the first few chapters, first few verses of this book, I think verse 2, 3, and even verse 4. So that's what Paul had spoken about. Paul could not tell, number 2, whether the person called up to the blank was in the body or out of the body. And so that's the third heaven. Can you imagine having a vision of this sort? Third heaven, of course, as I mentioned, I think last week, referring to that heavenly home or heavenly abode of God. Number 3, this person is also said, the one who had the vision, is also said to have been caught up into, and the blank there is, paradise. It must have been a remarkable thing. When this trance is over, when this vision is through, it must have been a remarkable thing to reflect on what you had saw. And as I said last week, I wonder why Paul was shown all these things. And one conclusion, probably many reasons, but one conclusion I get is to help him to remain faithful in the face of hardships like he's going through with this congregation. Number 4, what was unusual about what was heard by the person called up? Well, he heard unspeakable words, and I don't know what those words are. They're unspeakable. What does that mean? Does that mean that God had told him not to speak it, or is it things he just can't explain? I wonder if it's just more what.
Well, it states that it is not lawful of a man to utter.
Yeah, I don't know that he could. If he could utter about it, I don't know that you could explain what he might have saw. So that evidently God had restricted him. So now Paul turns. What does Paul call the thorn of the flesh? He said it was a messenger of Satan to buffet him. Do you ever consider maybe issues in your life a messenger from Satan to buffet you? I have. I wonder if that's not God's way of allowing me to be reminded. Don't put too much stock in this world because it's coming to an end. That's the truth. And of course, something, whatever that was, would be something that would remind him of those things. Number 6, what was the thorn given to Paul? Or why was it given to Paul? Lest he be exalted above measure. Really?
I think it was to make him humble too, more.
Yeah, that's what he's talking about. To being exalted above measure is being very prideful. Huh? Keep him humble. And how easy is it for us to be overinflated in our own minds about us? That's pretty easy to do. You know, you pat me on the back once and I'll tell you, I think I'm just the best thing that ever was. Right, Cindy? You do too, don't you?
You do, you think that.
Yeah. We do that, don't we? It's very easy to become too prideful. And so that was part of the problem. Number 7, Paul asked the Lord how many times for relief from this thorn of the flesh. 3 times.
3 times.
He was earnest about this. Whatever it was,
It bothered him.
it bothered him. Badly. Bad enough that he, and when I think about Paul asking for it 3 times, I'm not thinking he just said, God, remove this. I'm thinking there was 3 occasions in his life where he spent quite a time praying about it. And of course, God's not going to remove it. And why didn't God remove it?
And then it must have been something that he felt that if it was removed, he could probably do a better job, or,
Paul may have thought so.
if
Yeah.
he would just, that was not there. So, but not realizing at the same time the reason the Lord gave it to him
Yeah.
was to be able,
So here the answer that he's looking for, why did the Lord not remove it? Because God said his grace was sufficient and that his strength, the strength of God, came through weakness. What weakness? My weakness. If I recognize my frailty, my inabilities, then I have to rely on God. You know what? You may go through a 10-year period and you've got the best life and nothing's going wrong and you're just on cloud 9, then all of a sudden the roadblock's thrown in front of you. And who do you turn to as a Christian? God. Paul had that thorn in the flesh. Ours, maybe you have one that's with you all the time. I don't know. Paul did. But usually our thorns in the flesh are temporary. We overcome through prayer, through blessings from God, and then our lives are calm again, right? Until the next one comes along. God's grace is sufficient. The way you become strong as a Christian is to be weak as a man and allow me, that's the intent, allow God to help you. Then you're strong. Every time you overcome that threat from Satan, it makes us a stronger person, spiritually speaking. Number 9, why would Paul gladly glory in his infirmities? So that the power of Christ rests upon him. I kind of struggle with that just a little bit. Let the power of Christ may rest upon me, he said. And what does that, what do you think he means? Does anyone want to venture? Is it true that God, Jesus, Christ, imparts strength to us? And I think that's what the previous question was intimating. And so I think that's what he's talking about, the power that we have after going through these trials. That power comes from God. And no, it's not a miraculous event, but nonetheless, it comes from God. Next question. Did Paul apply the scripture? Verse 10, and let me read it again. Therefore I take pleasure in my infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. When I am weak, then I am strong. And then he asks, he talks about my grace being sufficient for thee. Does Paul apply that to becoming a Christian? Well, the answer is yes. And it may not be worded that way, but that's what this is all about. Without the strength of God on me or with me or on my side, I'm lost. So we should never become so boastful, so proud that we think we can do things on our own. And I think that verse 10, I think, goes along with that and really helps explain my grace is sufficient for thee. If you read 9 and 10 together, I think it does relate to salvation in the end.
As Christians, we have mercy and grace. The mercy, is in unto until.
It does. And then remember, of course, mercy is God's ability not to give you what you deserve. Grace is God's ability to give you just the opposite. God loves us so much that he gives us mercy, that he gives us grace. Next, number 11. The blanket apostles were wrong among Corinthians in all faces. And that's the signs of the apostles. Those miraculous signs, those wonders, the next blank, those mighty deeds that Paul had done. So there should have been no question. Number 12, of what wrong did Paul ask the Corinthians to forgive him? Well, Paul's wrong was simply this, that he did not become a burden to them. Perhaps he should have said, you must help. Maybe it would have made them stronger. You know, you're getting something for free, you always expect it to be free, don't you?
You
So,
appreciate more.
if you have to extend for it, you do appreciate it. That's true. That's true in all aspects of life, even in this spiritual setting. I think it's very, very true. And so, number 13, in stating his plans to come a third time to visit Corinth, Paul said, I seek not yours, but you. Again, he didn't want the money. He wasn't looking to get rich off of them. He was worried and concerned about them. Each and every individual, the souls that were involved. Question 14. What would Paul gladly do for the Corinthian brethren? He said, I would spend, that is, take money out of my own pocket, and I'll be spent. I'll allow you to use me. And no doubt he's talking about in the service of God, allowing them to use him to preach and to teach and to try to win lost souls and to get those who have sinned, as he's tried to convince in his letter, to get them to be penitent concerning those sins. Number 15, in what was the church at Corinth inferior to other churches? Well, they weren't inferior. Not at all. And Paul makes that statement. He says it like this: they were short in nothing. Number 16, because Paul was crafty, he caught the Corinthians with guile. Guile, a word we don't use, but it means they were being deceitful. If Paul, and he's speaking by inspiration, says that this congregation is deceitful, then their statements about them are untrue, and they know it's untrue. That's how it's deceit. They're saying things they know aren't true. Do you suppose they were liking the false doctrine? I believe that. They no longer than the church had been established, but they were already getting into the position, these Judaizing teachers coming in and trying to combine Judaism and Christianity, and they liked that. Why would they like that? Well, I don't know if I know all the answers, but we human beings like what we can hear, what we can touch, what we can see. And what was Judaism full of? All of those symbols and all of that kind of worship. They liked that. And that's my thinking on that anyway. Number 17, Paul referred to his association with Titus, is the answer. And another brother at Corinth as an example of how Christians ought to conduct themselves. Number 18, what did Paul fear that he might find Paul? Paul feared that he would not find them as he wished. That he would not find them repenting or being penitent. That he would not find them receiving him with open arms. I can imagine when Paul had established the congregation and he leaves that first time, I can imagine there were tears of sadness that he was leaving. Now I imagine there's ire or anger at the thought that he's coming back to tell us what to do. That seems to be their attitude right now.
Or knowing what they would be like
Yeah.
when he got back.
Yes.
We rebuked you.
Yeah. So the answer there would be that he would not find them as he wished, and that they would not find him as they wished. You know, they don't want to be rebuked. A Christian who's penitent is accepting of rebuke. Aren't they? Now sometimes it takes us a few days to accept rebuke. It's just because we are human beings. Sometimes we read. But that was the situation there. Verse number 19, question 19. Paul feared that he might bewail many who had sinned and not repented of their. And the three things were uncleanliness, fornication, lasciviousness. I want you to think about those things that he's just mentioned. These are things that definitely they needed to get rid of in their lives. They needed to put it out of their lives. What's the word uncleanliness here mean? It really, the Greek word means impurity. So we're talking about physically or morally unclean people. The word fornication, of course, we understand what that is. That's idolatry, fornication, that kind of deal. The other word, lasciviousness. Just filthy people wanting what they want. Oftentimes would involve other sins. So that's Paul's issue. That's what he's afraid of. Real quickly, we'll do the true and false. I'll not comment, just give an answer. Though the Corinthians were Christians, there were such sins as tumult, strife, fornication among them. That's true. 2, it appears that Paul was the one called up to the throne of heaven. It does appear that way. Number 3, the third time Paul asked the Lord to remove the thorn, his request was granted. That's false. And Paul said he took pleasure in such things as infirmities, reproaches, necessities, persecutions, distress, for Christ's sake. And that's true. The Apostle Paul hopes someday will be able to catch up with the very chiefest apostles. That's false. Paul wasn't one whit, according to our previous chapter, behind any of them. The Corinthians fully supported Paul while he preached at Corinth. That's false. The church, monetarily speaking, the church at Corinth was praised for being a church without God. That's false. They were deceived. And Paul regretted the differences that he and Titus had while they were at Corinth. Well, that's false. Paul said they spoke the same. They were of the same mind. Next question. In this chapter, Eve is mentioned for her gracefulness and perfection. That's false. She's not mentioned here at all. And then finally, a messenger of Satan punished Paul for the wrongdoings he had committed. No, it was not a punishment. That's false. Any questions or comments?